1970 was the last full-throttle gasp of America's golden muscle car era. It was a year when automakers stuffed their biggest, most powerful V8s into the most aggressive, colorful, and attitude-laden bodies Detroit ever built. Whether it was tightening emissions regulations, rising insurance costs, or the looming fuel crisis, the muscle car party came to an abrupt end. These 10 beasts were either axed after a single model year, neutered beyond recognition. Let's take a look at 10 American muscle cars from 1970 that went big and then disappeared.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10, the 1972 Dodge Demon 340, exploring its performance, controversy, and ultimate rebranding. Today we're diving into one of the more colorful and controversial footnotes in Mopar history, the 1972 Dodge Demon 340. This small, aggressive compact had the heart of a muscle car, the price of a budget coupe, and a name that stirred up protests in conservative circles. The Demon 340 was arguably one of Dodge's sharpest moves in the early 1970s. Take a lightweight platform, give it real V8 power, and sell it cheap to young buyers. It checked all the right performance boxes, but the devil was in the details. And in this case, the devil was literally on the fender badge. To understand the Demon 340, we have to go back to the Dodge Dart, a compact car known for its conservative styling and economy-minded engineering. In 1971, Dodge introduced a sportier fastback version of the Dart called the Dodge Demon, based on the Plymouth Duster's A-body platform. It was Dodge's attempt to create a direct rival to the Chevy Nova SS, the Ford Maverick Grabber, and the AMC Hornet SC 360. The Demon wasn't meant to be a halo car. It was a budget performer, something to appeal to younger drivers who wanted fun without breaking the bank. The highlight of the lineup was the Dodge Demon 340. 340 cubic inch, 5.6-liter, small block V8. Net horsepower, 1972, 240 horsepower after the switch from gross ratings. Torque, around 290 pound-feet. 10.5-to-1 compression, slightly lowered from earlier years. Optional 4-speed manual with Hurst shifter or Torque Flight 3-speed automatic. Dual exhaust, performance suspension, and rally wheels. In a car that weighed just over 3,000 pounds, this setup delivered 0 to 60 in the low 6-second range, and quarter-mile times in the 14s, remarkable for an affordable compact. It was one of the last truly quick Mopars before emissions, insurance, and regulation neutered the entire segment. The 1972 Demon 340 stood out visually. Blackout hood treatment with dual hood scoops. Optional hood pins and performance stripe kits. Demon logo, featuring a little red cartoon devil with a pitchfork. Rally wheels and dual chrome exhaust tips. Sporty bucket seats, optional console with a floor shifter. Despite being derived from the Dart, the Demon had a sleeker, fastback profile, more reminiscent of a pony car. Inside it was simple but driver-focused. Nothing fancy, but all business. The name and badging, however, would become its downfall. Shortly after launch, the Demon name and devil-themed logos drew fire from religious groups, primarily in the Bible Belt, parent organizations, conservative media outlets. Some dealerships even refused to sell the Demon, and protests popped up over the perceived glorification of satanic imagery. Despite Dodge's attempts to play it off as lighthearted fun, the public backlash was real, and it hurt sales. The 1972 Demon 340 was the last full production year for the model under that name. Emissions rules were tightening, compression ratios were being dropped, leaded fuel was on the way out. Horsepower was being rated in net figures, resulting in seemingly lower numbers. While the 340 still delivered spirited performance, the regulatory drag was starting to set in. Dodge did little to evolve the Demon for 1973, focusing instead on preparing for a rebrand. In 1973, Dodge dropped the Demon name entirely, replacing it with the far more generic Dart Sport. The devil mascot and cheeky marketing vanished overnight. The Dart Sport 340 and later Dart Sport 360 models kept some performance, but the magic was gone. The new name lacked the personality and punch of Demon, and the styling grew more bloated with each model year. The once potent Demon formula was diluted until it faded into the background of 1970s Malaise-era mediocrity. Despite its short run, the 1972 Dodge Demon 340 has earned a cult following. Reasons why. It was one of the last lightweight fast Mopars before the Malaise era took hold. The 340 V8 is still regarded as one of Chrysler's best small blocks. The cartoon devil graphics and aggressive name made it stand out in an era of boring badges. Low production numbers and early discontinuation mean surviving examples are rare and desirable. Number 9, the 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 446 pack, an aggressive muscle machine that arrived just as the golden age of muscle cars was beginning to crumble. Today's lecture takes us to the dawn of the decline for muscle cars, and we focus on one of Mopar's final fire breathers, the 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 446 pack. A potent combination of brute force and raw engineering, this car represents the muscle car ideal pushed to its limits, but arriving in a moment when the world was already turning against speed, pals, and rebellion on wheels. Let's explore how the 1971 Super B attempted to stay relevant with serious hardware, but ultimately fell victim to changing designs, regulations, and consumer tastes. To understand the 1971 Super B, we need to start with the car it was based on, the third-generation Dodge Charger, which debuted that year with an all-new look, more fuselage-inspired styling, wider body with pronounced curves, hidden headlights, Coke bottle sides, heavier construction for safety and comfort. But this redesign came at a cost, namely weight. The 1971 Charger was notably heavier than its predecessor, and that extra bulk made performance harder to come by, unless you stuffed an elephant under the hood. That's exactly what Dodge did with the Super B. Until 1970, the Super B had been Dodge's budget muscle car based on the Coronet, a no-nonsense alternative to the Plymouth Roadrunner. But in 1971, Dodge eliminated the Coronet two-door, and the Super B name was transferred to the Charger lineup, now becoming the lowest trim Charger performance model, sitting below the RT. This shift was symbolic of the times. Performance was being merged into more civilized packages, but the heart of the B remained wild. Now let's get to the heart of the matter, the engine. The top dog in the 1971 Super B lineup was the legendary 446-pack, specs, 446-pack, 3.2-barrel carburetors, displacement, 440 cubic inches, 7.2 liters, horsepower, 385 horsepower at 4,700 RPM, torque, 490 pound-feet at 3,200 RPM, carburation, triple 2-barrel Holley carbs, hence 6-pack, 0.060 miles per hour, approximately 5.5 seconds with proper setup, quarter mile, approximate 13.8 seconds at 105 miles per hour. That is serious performance, even by today's standards. It could eat up Camaros, Mustangs, and most GTOs of the same era. The 446-pack was raw, brutal, and fast, a street-legal dragster for anyone bold enough to handle it. There were also other engine options: 383 Magnum, standard V8, 340 small block, 426 Hemi, ultra rare, few produced in Super B trim for 71. But the 6-pack stood out because it offered nearly Hemi-level performance without the Hemi price tag. Despite all this muscle, the 1971 Charger Super B had two major problems. The 1971 Super B with a 446-pack is rare today for good reason. Very few were built. Total Super B production in 1971, 5,054 units. 446-pack equipped cars, fewer than 1,000. 426 Hemi cars, only 22 built, making them Mopar holy grails. After 1971, the Super B name was discontinued in the US, though it lived on briefly in Mexico. The Charger RT continued for a while, but the golden age was over. This was the final year for the 6-pack option as well. By 1972, lower compression ratios and stricter emissions killed multi-carb setups, and the muscle magic disappeared. Today, the 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 440 6-pack has grown in appreciation, not just for its rarity, but for being one of the last real muscle cars before the collapse. Controllers admire its bold looks, raw power, and Mopar heritage. Enthusiasts see it as a tragic hero of the muscle car story, built with the right heart but trapped in the wrong era. It stands as a testament to how far Dodge was willing to go to keep the muscle dream alive, even when the writing was on the wall. In closing, the 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 446 pack was not a failure. It was a victim of timing. It had everything a muscle fan wanted: towering horsepower, intimidating looks, racing pedigree. Number 8. The 1970 Chevrolet Nova SS 396. A small-bodied car with big block muscle. A symbol of raw power that was ultimately doomed by market realities and changing regulations. Today, we take a deep dive into a fascinating chapter of American muscle car history, the 1970 Chevrolet Nova SS 396. At first glance, the Nova may have looked like just another compact car. But in SS 396 trim, it became something altogether more dangerous. A lightweight brawler stuffed with a brute force engine. It was one of the most unassuming muscle cars of its time. But while it packed serious power, it also arrived at a moment when insurance premiums, safety regulations, and fuel economy concerns were converging to crush the muscle movement. Let's explore the origins, engineering, performance, and eventual decline of this misunderstood and short-lived powerhouse. The Chevrolet Nova was never originally designed as a muscle car. Launched in 1962 as the Chevy 2, it was meant to be a compact car alternative to the Ford Falcon. Practical, affordable, and lightweight. A simple platform with wide customer appeal. By the mid to late 60s, the car had evolved into the Nova nameplate and began to attract interest from younger buyers who wanted a lightweight platform with serious performance potential. Chevy responded by offering Super Sport SS versions, starting with small blocks and eventually leading to the big block variants. By 1968, the Nova had adopted a more muscular, aggressive design, wider track, longer body, and a meaner stance. That year also marked the beginning of factory-offered 396 big block V8s in the SS package. By 1970, the Nova SS 396 had become one of the best pound-for-pound performance cars Chevrolet ever built. Let's talk power. The 1970 Nova SS 396 came equipped with one of several versions of Chevrolet's legendary 396 cubic inch V8, officially 402 cubic inches by 1970 due to bore changes but still badged as 396L. Available 396 engine options: L34, 350 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, 415 pounds-feet of torque. L78 optional, 375 horsepower at 5,600 RPM, 415 pounds-feet of torque. Note, the L78 was discontinued early in the 1970 model year. 3-speed manual, base, 4-speed Muncie manual, 3-speed turbo hydromatic automatic. Performance stats with L34. 0 to 60 miles per hour, 6.5 seconds. Quarter mile, 14.3 seconds at 100 plus miles per hour. Curb weight, 3,200 pounds, light by big block standards. This was serious muscle. In fact, the Nova SS 396 could outrun many heavier Chevel SS 396s and even give the Corvette a scare, at a fraction of the cost. Despite its strengths, the 1970 Nova SS 396 was a dying breed, and the signs were everywhere. By 1970, insurance companies had started penalizing young drivers with high-performance cars. The Nova SS 396 fell into this category. Big block engine, higher rates. Two-door coupe, higher rates. Performance nameplate, higher rates. Insuring one of these became cost-prohibitive for its target buyers, especially teenagers and young adults. Though the Clean Air Act didn't fully hit until 1973 to 74, the writing was already on the wall. Big blocks were increasingly seen as gas guzzlers, dirty emitters, outdated tech. Automakers, including Chevrolet, started to pivot away from raw performance in favor of emissions compliance and comfort. The L78 high-output version was discontinued early in the 1970 model year, making it a rarity today. Production numbers for the SS 396 dropped. Fewer than 19,000 SS Novas were produced in 1970. Of those, only a portion were true big block models. That made it hard to find, expensive to insure, and increasingly impractical to own. The 1970 Nova SS 396 was essentially the last of its kind. By 1971, the 396 was replaced by a detuned 402 with lower compression. Horsepower ratings dropped due to both emissions and the switch from gross to net horsepower. The SS name continued, but performance fizzled out. Number 7, the 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner 440 6-barrel, a car that still carried the firepower of the muscle car era, but was clearly feeling the early weight of government regulation, insurance penalties, and changing market tastes. Today, we're going to examine one of the last true beasts of the golden muscle car era, the 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner 440 6-barrel. With 3 screaming carburetors and brutal straight-line performance, it was a holdover from the wild, no-compromise days of American horsepower. But 1971 was also a turning point, the beginning of a steep descent for muscle cars. The Roadrunner 440 6-barrel was one of the loudest to roar, but it did so just as the muscle market was falling apart. Let's explore how this mighty machine tried to carry the performance torch forward, and how insurance rates, emissions mandates, and social backlash pulled the rug out from under it. When Plymouth introduced the Roadrunner in 1968, it was affordable muscle with real performance, stripped down, no frills, pure speed, targeted at young buyers who didn't want the weight or price of a GTX or Charger. And it worked. Plymouth struck gold. By 1969 and 1970, the Roadrunner was a sales smash and a cultural icon, even spawning the wild Superbird variant in 1970. But by 1971, the market had changed. 1971 ushered in a full redesign for the Roadrunner. The blocky, squared-off look was replaced by a rounded fuselage body style with a swooping beltline, more aerodynamic intentions, updated safety features mandated by the government. It looked futuristic, but added weight and lost some of its original grit. Some critics said the Roadrunner was starting to look more like a mature GT car than a bare-knuckle street brawler. Now let's talk about what really mattered, the power plant. At the top of the 1971 Roadrunner lineup was the 440 6-barrel Achaea 6-pack V8. 440 cubic inches, 7.2 liters V8, triple 2-barrel carburetors, Holley 390 horsepower at 4,700 RPM, 490 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM, compression ratio 10.3 to 1, performance stats 0 to 60 miles per hour, approximately 5.5 seconds. Quarter mile, approximately 13.7 seconds at 104 miles per hour. Top speed, approximately 130 plus miles per hour. Paired with a heavy-duty torque flight automatic or optional 4-speed manual, the 440 6-barrel was built for brutal acceleration. It was a drag strip monster. This wasn't just a fast car, it was among the most powerful muscle machines ever built by Chrysler. Only the Hemi-powered versions stood above it, and those were priced and optioned out of most buyers' reach. But despite its performance pedigree, the 1971 Roadrunner 440 6-barrel was on borrowed time. Here's why. By 1971, insurance companies began targeting muscle cars with sky-high premiums. Despite the Roadrunner's reputation, sales declined dramatically in 1971. Total Roadrunner production, 1971, 14,000 units. 440 6-barrel production, fewer than 800 units. Estimates vary. For comparison, 1969 Roadrunner sales had topped 80,000 units. That's a staggering drop. The 440 6-barrel was too expensive, too wild, and too untamable for a market that was suddenly skittish about performance. The 440 6-barrel would disappear after 1971. Emissions rules and fuel standards made triple carb setups obsolete. By 1972, the most powerful Roadrunner would top out around 280 net horsepower. The 6-barrel name was dead, and with it, The idea of a Roadrunner being a true monster on the street. The car that began life as a raw, affordable street racer had been forced to either evolve or die. And in the case of the 446 barrel, it was a glorious final gasp before extinction. Today, the 1971 Roadrunner 446 barrel is a rare and coveted piece of muscle car history. Its curved body styling and powerful engine make it a unique transitional model. Because so few were made, 6-barrel examples now command high six-figure prices at auctions. It's remembered as one of the last true muscle cars before the decline. What makes it special isn't just its speed, but the context. It stood at the edge of an era, defiantly fast, roaring against a coming storm. Number 6, the 1971 Chrysler 300 Hurst, a bizarre yet fascinating fusion of luxury and muscle car ambitions. A limited edition vehicle that tried to bridge two worlds and ended up stranded in between. Today we take a deep dive into one of the most peculiar and misunderstood muscle-era relics, the 1971 Chrysler 300 Hurst. This was not your average muscle car, nor was it a typical Chrysler luxury cruiser. It was a hybrid, a luxury missile wearing muscle graphics, and it arrived at a time when both segments were beginning to unravel. The 300 Hurst was bold, brash, and rare. It packed a big block 440 V8 with serious power, but it also came wrapped in a strange styling package that made people scratch their heads. And with a steep price tag and unclear identity, it was dead on arrival, with only 501 units ever made. Let's break down how this strange beast came to be, and why it became one of the rarest oddballs of the early 1970s. To understand the 300 Hurst, we need to start with the companies behind it. Chrysler, traditionally known for big, stately cars, not wild muscle machines. Hurst Performance, the kings of shifters and performance accessories. Their name was synonymous with hot rodding, especially in the 1960s. In the late 1960s, Hurst had already found success co-branding limited edition cars with Oldsmobile, Hurst Olds, AMC, SC/Rambler, Pontiac, Hurst Grand Prix projects. So Chrysler thought, why not create a limited run performance flagship to bring youthful excitement to their big, conservative 300 series? Thus, the 1971 Chrysler 300 Hurst was born, a strange mix of brute force, high-end amenities, and awkward marketing. The 300 Hurst's appearance was anything but subtle. Chrysler took their already massive 300 coupe and gave it the full Hurst treatment. Color: Spinnaker white with satin gold accents, fiberglass hood with a non-functional power bulge scoop, flush-mounted trunk spoiler, part of a fiberglass deck lid, unique Hurst emblems on the rear fenders and grille, hide headlamps, custom 15-inch rally wheels, no vinyl roof, a rarity in the luxury segment at the time. It looked part land yacht, part muscle car, and part aftermarket oddity. While some found it eye-catching, many buyers found it confused and garish. The real surprise came under the hood. The 300 Hurst wasn't just cosmetic. Engine specs: 440 cubic inch, 7.2-liter RB V8 4-barrel carburetor, 375 horsepower at 4,600 RPM, 480 pound of torque at 3,200 RPM, compression ratio 9.7:1, paired to the torque flight a 727 3-speed automatic. Despite weighing over 4,200 pounds, the 300 Hurst could hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 7 seconds, run the quarter mile in about 15 seconds. The cabin was designed more like a Chrysler New Yorker than a Roadrunner. Premium leather trim bucket seats, many in saddle tan, full-length center console, rally gauges, power everything, windows, seats, steering, brakes, optional air conditioning, AM/FM stereo with 8-track option. The 300 Hurst was essentially a personal luxury coupe with muscle attitude, a concept ahead of its time in some ways, but also totally out of sync with buyer expectations in 1971. This is where the Chrysler 300 Hurst truly stumbled. Too expensive. With a price of over $5,000 in 1971, it was priced higher than most muscle cars and nearly as much as a Lincoln or Cadillac. Too weird. Muscle car buyers didn't want plush leather interiors and automatic-only setups. Too plush. Luxury car buyers didn't want power scoops and gaudy gold stripes. No manual transmission option, a deal breaker for hardcore muscle fans. The 300 Hurst didn't know who it was trying to impress. It alienated both camps, luxury buyers and performance enthusiasts. Chrysler had hoped to build around 1,500 units. Hurst even contracted with a third-party company, Cars and Concepts in Michigan, to handle conversion of standard 300s into Hurst models. Only 501 units were completed, 480 retail cars, plus 21 promotional miscellaneous builds. Many dealerships had trouble selling them. No follow-up model appeared in 1972. The idea was dead. Number 5. The 1973 AMC Javelin AMX 401, a muscle car that tried to keep the spirit of performance alive in the early 70s, but ultimately fell victim to changing tastes, rising regulations, and its own awkward transformation. Today, we'll examine one of the final hurrahs of the classic muscle car era, a vehicle that aimed high but couldn't quite hit the mark. The 1973 AMC Javelin AMX 401. It was a car born from a company that had always danced to its own beat, American Motors Corporation, AMC, and tried to do what the big three were doing, but with fewer resources and a more unconventional approach. The 1973 AMX 401 had brute force, a bold shape, and racing pedigree, but it also had a bloated body, declining muscle car demand, and styling that strayed far from its roots. Let's dig into how this model came to be, why it mattered, and why it ultimately disappeared just 1 year later. First, a little context. By the late 1960s, AMC knew that its image as a builder of safe, economical family cars wasn't going to attract younger buyers. So in 1968, they introduced the Javelin, a sleek pony car aimed at the Mustang, Camaro, and Firebird. Then, in 1969 came the AMX, a shorter two-seat version of the Javelin that focused purely on performance. Though never a sales leader, the AMX earned credibility with a 390 V8 and a distinctive, athletic stance. By 1971, AMC decided to merge the AMX name into the Javelin line, dropping the two-seater entirely. What emerged was the second-generation Javelin, a longer, more aggressive car that looked radically different from its predecessor. By 1973, the Javelin had grown. The design was bold, even beautiful to some, but no longer had the clean, compact look of the original. Pronounced Coke bottle curves, a long, protruding front nose and aggressive grille, optionally rear spoiler and body-colored bumpers, flared fenders and a bold hood bulge, AMX-specific trim and badging. But all this came at a cost, added weight and size. What had once been AMC's sleek pony car had become a heavy cruiser. And in an era of rising insurance costs and tightening emissions rules, that weight mattered. Despite the bulk, AMC gave the AMX real firepower. The top-of-the-line engine was the 401 cubic inch V8, AMC's biggest and most powerful factory motor. 401 CID 6.6L V8, net horsepower, 255 horsepower, previously gross rated at over 330 horsepower. Torque, 345 lb-ft, 4-barrel carburetor. 10-to-1 compression, drops slightly in later models. Paired with a torque command automatic or optional 4-speed manual. The performance was decent. 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6.6 seconds. Quarter mile in the low 15-second range. However, by 1973, the 1973 AMX came with optional comfort and style, but the interior had begun to show its age. Bucket seats with optional high-back vinyl, machine-turned instrument panels and rally gauges, center console on most AMX 401s. Basic trim, far from luxury, it walked a line between performance and practicality, but lacked the refinement of competitors like the Camaro Z28 or Mustang Mach-1. AMC hoped that the bold looks and big engine would keep the Javelin AMX competitive. But by 1973, the muscle car market was imploding. What went wrong? Insurance premiums were sky-high for high-horsepower coupes. Emissions regulations began choking output. Fuel prices and environmental concerns were rising. The Javelin's size and weight made it less appealing as a performance car. AMC had no real marketing budget to compete with the Big Three. Even with SCCA Trans Am racing success, thanks to Mark Donohue's championship in 1971, the showroom effect was minimal. In 1973, AMC built only about 5,707 Javelin AMX units, and only a small percentage came with the 401 engine. The writing was on the wall. In 1974, the Javelin saw its final year. The body grew even heavier with 5-mile-per-hour safety bumpers, further bloating its appearance and dulling performance. That year, AMC quietly retired the Javelin and AMX badge. The company would never build another true muscle car again. Number 4. The 1974 Buick Century Grand Sport 455, a car that tried to carry on Buick's muscle legacy, but ultimately failed to resonate in a rapidly changing automotive era. Today's lecture explores the 1974 Buick Century Grand Sport 455, a vehicle that tried, and largely failed, to rekindle the fire of Buick's legendary performance models like the GSX. By 1974, the American muscle car was being neutered by regulations, insurance premiums, and market apathy. Buick, once surprisingly bold with its big torque bruisers, stumbled trying to carry on that legacy in the form of this bloated and underwhelming Grand Sport. This is the story of a nameplate struggling for relevance, a muscle car in decline, and a brand that couldn't quite figure out who it was talking to anymore. Before diving into the 1974 model, it's important to understand Buick's muscle history. In the late 60s and early 70s, Buick shocked many with its powerful but refined Grand Sport (GS) models, especially the 1970 GSX 455 Stage 1. A muscle car legend with 510 pound-feet of torque, one of the highest of the era. The GS cars were powerful, well-built, and surprisingly fast, yet retained a kind of quiet sophistication. Buick had proven that performance and luxury could coexist. But by 1974, this formula was breaking down. In 1973, GM replaced the aging Skylark-based platform with the Colonnade-style Century featuring large chrome 5 miles-per-hour bumpers, tall grills and heavy side profiles, a more formal upright look, T-top style rooflines, pillared coupes. These changes came in response to federal crash safety regulations, but they stripped much of the sleek, aggressive attitude muscle car fans craved. By 1974, Buick rolled out the Century Grand Sport 455 as a performance trim, but it looked more like a plush personal coupe than a street terror. While some elements attempted to evoke performance, stripes, badges, and dual sport mirrors, the 1974 Grand Sport 455 couldn't hide its bulk. Massive front and rear bumpers, dictated by federal regulations, gave it a bloated, awkward profile. Minimal ground-hugging design, it sat high and looked heavy. Available striping and GS badging added flash but couldn't disguise the lack of muscle-era aggression. 15-inch wheels were available, but the look still skewed more toward luxury cruiser than tire-shredding hot rod. In short, it didn't look fast, and in the muscle car world that matters. The Grand Sport 455 boasted impressive displacement on paper, but like many mid-70s muscle cars, it was a victim of detuning. 455 cubic inch 7.5-liter V8. Net horsepower, 230 horsepower. Torque, 360 pound-feet. Compression ratio, around 8.5. 1.4-barrel Rochester quadrajet carburetor, paired with a TH400 automatic transmission. The Century Grand Sport 455 was comfortable and well-built, in classic Buick tradition. You got optional bucket seats and console shifter, full instrumentation and faux wood trim, cushy ride and quiet highway manners, power steering and brakes as standard, but the driving experience lacked engagement. The steering was vague, the suspension was tuned for comfort, and the weight, around 4,200 pounds, dulled any performance thrills. It was fast in a straight line, once the big 455 wound up, but lacked the nimbleness or excitement of earlier muscle machines. The 1974 Grand Sport 455 existed in a weird gray zone. Too big and soft for traditional muscle car fans, too flashy and thirsty for economy-focused buyers, too performance-light for enthusiasts. Add in skyrocketing insurance rates, rising gas prices, and increasing emissions scrutiny, and it's no surprise sales were lackluster. Smaller, cheaper compacts like the Nova or Dart, more refined personal luxury coupes like the Monte Carlo, or drop muscle altogether. The Buick GS name no longer meant what it once had. Today, the 1974 Buick Century Grand Sport 455 is a curiosity more than a classic. The waning years of GM's big block era, the confusion of the mid-70s muscle market, and Buick's failed attempt to hold on to performance heritage in a shifting regulatory and cultural landscape. Number 3, the 1975 Oldsmobile Omega SX, a forgotten attempt by Oldsmobile to inject sportiness into a compact clone of the Chevrolet Nova during a time when the muscle car market was collapsing. Today we examine the 1975 Oldsmobile Omega SX, a car that attempted to bring sport and flair to a platform that had already run its course. As a badge-engineered cousin of the Chevrolet Nova, the Omega SX didn't blaze new trails or deliver groundbreaking performance. It was, at best, a tepid offering with sporty aspirations in a time when the muscle car scene had all but evaporated. With the performance market in freefall due to emissions regulations, skyrocketing insurance, and the aftershocks of the 1973 oil crisis, the Omega SX never really stood a chance. But its existence tells us a lot about how automakers scrambled in the mid-1970s. The 1975 Omega SX was built on GM's X-Body platform, which included Chevrolet Nova, Pontiac Ventura, Buick Apollo, Oldsmobile Omega. These vehicles shared nearly identical sheet metal and structure, similar engine options, common interiors with minor trim differences. Each brand added its own grille, badging, and slight interior changes, but mechanically and structurally, these were the same cars. The problem? Everyone already recognized this. By 1975, consumers were savvy enough to spot a dressed-up Nova when they saw one, and the Omega SX was no exception. The SX variant of the Omega was Oldsmobile's attempt to inject sportiness into a compact car that had always leaned toward conservative styling. SX badges on the fenders and grille, unique striping or vinyl accents, rally-style wheels, borrowed from other GM divisions, blacked-out grille trim, and dual sport mirrors. Unfortunately, the changes were purely cosmetic. There were no meaningful chassis improvements, aerodynamic aids, or muscular flares. If anything, it looked like a Nova with a better haircut, but no new moves. The Omega SX was supposed to offer a sportier look for Olds buyers who didn't want a muscle car, but it failed to stand out in a sea of similar GM compacts. Under the hood, the Omega SX at least offered a V8, which gave it some muscle on paper. 5.7-liter, 350 cu-in, Oldsmobile Rocket V8, roughly 170-180 net horsepower, torque, 275 pound-feet, 2-barrel or 4-barrel carburetor, depending on trim, a 3-speed turbo-hydromatic automatic, or a manual transmission, rare. Unfortunately, even the sporty SX suffered from low compression, emissions equipment, retarded ignition timing. This meant sluggish acceleration even with V8 torque. A 0-60 time of around 10-11 seconds was common, adequate for 1975, but nowhere near the muscle car expectations implied by the SX badge. Despite its V8 engine, the Omega SX offered no real performance tuning. Soft suspension carried over from base models, excess body roll and understeer, non-performance gearing, power steering and brakes. Inside, the Omega SX was hardly sporty. Bucket seats and floor console, simulated wood grain dash trim, sport steering wheel lifted from other Oldsmobiles. But the interior was still cramped and featured low buck materials, thin door panels, and limited insulation. The gauges were minimal, and the SX didn't even include a tachometer unless specifically ordered. It felt like a base model Nova, because that's what it fundamentally was. The Omega SX landed in a market that didn't ask for it. It tried to appeal to budget buyers who wanted sport without muscle car costs, Oldsmobile loyalists looking for something smaller. But the market was fractured, and the SX ended up in a strange middle ground. No true performance to match the badge, No identity beyond being a Nova knockoff. No marketing push. GM barely advertised it. High gas prices and tightening emissions killed demand. It sold in small numbers and disappeared after just 1 year. There was no 1976 Omega SX. It was quietly forgotten, much like its siblings from Buick and Pontiac. Today, the 1975 Oldsmobile Omega SX is nearly invisible on the collector market. You won't see it at auctions, you won't read about it in muscle car retrospectives, and you definitely won't find anyone restoring one unless it's part of a GM X-Body Oddities collection. Number 2, the 1977 Pontiac CanAm. A rare and ambitious car that was killed not by market failure, but by quality control issues that ended production almost as soon as it started. Today we're exploring one of the rarest and most unusual muscle luxury hybrids of the late 1970s, the 1977 Pontiac CanAm. A car born from a blend of leftover muscle car spirit, marketing boldness, and unfortunate production missteps. With bold looks, a powerful V8, and a name inspired by high-performance racing, the CanAm had all the makings of a cult classic, and yet only about 1,100 were ever built. Why? The answer, oddly enough, has to do with fiberglass molds. By 1977, the muscle car era was gasping for breath. Pontiac had moved on from legends like the GTO, which had already been watered down into an option package and discontinued. Insurance premiums, emissions controls, and shifting consumer tastes had all but killed off affordable performance. But Pontiac wasn't ready to give up entirely. The Firebird and Trans Am kept some sporty credibility alive, and the full-size lineup continued to flirt with performance-themed trims. It was in this context that the CanAm was born, an attempt to inject excitement into Pontiac's midsize lineup, using the Le Mans Sport Coupe as the foundation. The 1977 Pontiac CanAm was a special edition performance car offered only in 1977. It was based on the Le Mans Colonnade Coupe, which itself was part of GM's intermediate lineup. Brainchild of Jim Wangers, a key figure in the original GTO's marketing success, built in partnership with Motortown Corporation, an outside specialty company hired to customize the cars after they left the GM assembly line. Intended to be a low-production, high-impact performance model that combined Trans Am flair with midsize practicality. Despite the muscle car era being largely dead, the CanAm had impressive specs for 1977. Standard engine, Pontiac 400 CID 6.6-liter V8, rated at 200 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque. Optional in California, the Oldsmobile 403 CID V8, transmission, TH400 3-speed automatic, dual exhaust, performance rear axle, and heavy-duty cooling. That might not sound like much compared to 1960s muscle, but in the late 70s landscape of wheezing two-barrel V8s and strangled emissions, 200 horsepower was stout, especially in a midsize coupe. The CanAm could do 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 8 seconds, quicker than many performance cars of the era. The CanAm's visual package was where it truly stood out. Came in only one color, cameo white. Bold orange, red, and yellow racing stripes over the hood, roof, and rear deck. Unique shaker-style hood scoop, borrowed from the Firebird Trans Am. Color-keyed urethane front and rear fascias. Black rear deck spoiler, fiberglass. The CanAm moniker wasn't just marketing fluff. It referenced the Canadian-American Challenge Cup, a no-holds-barred racing series from the 60s and 70s that featured prototype sports cars with unlimited power. While the Pontiac CanAm didn't have 800 horsepower like the cars of the actual Can-Am racing series, the name helped tie the car to performance heritage and aggressive styling. Despite an encouraging reception, the Can-Am's run was cut short after only about 1,133 units were built. The culprit was the rear deck spoiler, a custom fiberglass part produced by Motortown. The original mold broke after only a few hundred units, and replacing it proved expensive, time-consuming, not worth the trouble, according to Pontiac executives. Rather than repair or retool, Pontiac quietly killed the program. Dealers who had requested Can-Ams were told the car was no longer available. Motortown's small-scale conversion process also didn't mesh well with Pontiac's production efficiency demands. The Can-Am went from a promising limited edition to an instant collector's item, for reasons no one had planned. Today, the 1977 Pontiac Can-Am is a highly collectible oddity, less than 1,200 built, fewer than 100 documented survivors in clean, original condition. It represents a rare spark of personality in a bland era. Number 1. The 1973 Chevrolet Chevel Laguna Type S3 454. One of the last big block personal coupes Chevrolet ever built. And a car that symbolized both the final flickers of muscle car firepower and the awkward evolution of the genre into a more personal luxury direction. Today's lecture dives into the strange and often overlooked world of early 1970s transitional muscle. We'll explore the 1973 Chevrolet Chevel Laguna Type S3 454, a car that tried to straddle two rapidly diverging markets, the dying muscle car scene and the booming personal luxury coupe trend. While it looked tough, packed a big block engine, and had the bones of a street bruiser, it failed to make a lasting mark. Not because it lacked substance, but because Chevrolet failed to market it properly, and the world had already begun to move on. Let's explore the context, the specs, the identity crisis, and the slow fade of this forgotten muscle luxury hybrid. To understand the Laguna, we need to understand the car world in 1973. The Clean Air Act had kicked in, forcing emissions controls and detuned engines. Unleaded gasoline became the new standard. Insurance companies began penalizing high-horsepower vehicles with massive premiums. Crash safety regulations demanded heavy 5 mph bumpers, and the 1973 OPEC oil crisis was just around the corner. Muscle cars, once raw, loud, and uncompromising, were being strangled by regulation and economics. Manufacturers had to pivot. Some ditched performance altogether. Others, like Chevrolet, tried to hide the muscle behind smoother, more luxurious skin. That's where the Laguna Hype S3 comes in. The Chevel Laguna replaced the Chevel Malibu as the top trim in Chevrolet's intermediate lineup for 1973. This was the first year of the Colonnade A-body redesign, which killed the hardtop coupe and introduced a more rigid and heavier, semi-pillared coupe structure. Laguna versus Malibu versus base Chevel, economy model. Malibu, mid-range, most popular. Laguna, top trim, sporty luxury-oriented. Chevrolet positioned the Laguna as a step up with a unique urethane nose, more refined styling, and upscale trim. But it wasn't just a pretty face. With the S3 package, it was also the only Chevel that could be ordered with Chevrolet's last muscle-era 454 cubic inch V8. Let's zero in on the Laguna Type S3, especially the 454 equipped version. Unique urethane front end, soft, body-colored nose for crash compliance and styling. More aerodynamic front clip than the standard Malibu. Special badging, S3 decals, sport wheels, blackout trim, and a rally-style dashboard. Available with stripes and sporty colors, but not overly loud, it looked like a grown-up muscle car. Here's where the Laguna struggled. It had muscle under the hood but lacked the marketing punch of earlier Chevel SS models. It had luxury features but wasn't quite plush enough to compete with the Grand Prix or Monte Carlo. It had sporty looks but was heavier and more isolated than real muscle car fans wanted. The result? A car that didn't quite satisfy either audience. The Laguna Type S3 454 wasn't advertised as a true performance car. There were no wild magazine features, no big ad campaigns, no aggressive race marketing. Chevy seemed unsure of what to do with it, and that was its downfall. Buyers who wanted performance gravitated toward the Camaro Z28 or Trans Am. Buyers who wanted luxury chose the Monte Carlo. And those who remembered the Chevel SS didn't see the S3 as a worthy successor. Chevrolet never released exact production numbers for how many Laguna Type S3s were built with the 454, but estimates suggest fewer than 10,000. It was a low-volume configuration in a short-lived model. By 1974, the 454 was still technically available, but emissions tuning choked power even further. Insurance rates made big blocks impractical. Chevrolet increasingly focused on smaller V8s like the 350. By 1976, the Laguna name was gone entirely, replaced by standard Malibu trims and Chevrolet's increasing emphasis on downsizing.